All right, guys. Oh, is that streaming now? It is. Okay, so welcome. Welcome to week 5, the end of week 5. Let's just do a quick little overview of where we're at in class. So looking at a calendar, this class technically is over on June 28th. So we have 3 weeks left of class, so hopefully you guys are working on the final projects and of course. So as I told you at the beginning of class on Monday, I rearranged the modules so that we could have Jill come in. She's going to be out of town for the next week or two, so I wasn't able to get her for the rest of the semester. So she came in class on Monday and did a really great kind of science behind the climate change issue for us. We kind of have a good base on that. Today what we're going to do is I wish I would have found this earlier. It's called Climate of Doubt on Frontline. I would have given it to you guys for homework. But we're going to watch part of it in the beginning of class today because it talks about, and it's from 2012, so it's a bit dated, but it gives really good information about how this became so politicized, kind of using the 2012 election as a backdrop. So that'll give us kind of the basis of the politics behind it. And then what we're going to do in the second half of class is we're going to really look at the Paris Climate Agreement. And we're going to look at Trump's reasons for pulling us out of the climate agreement and then see if those reasons, and then we're going to look at some fact checks from his speech and see if his reasonings really have any basis to be concerned about. Yes?
So on the climate thing,
yes.
I don't know if it was ever mentioned in previous classes, but Bill Nye Saves the World on Netflix.
Yeah.
I think the first episode is on climate change.
Yeah.
It's actually amazing.
There's a really funny John Oliver clip, if we have time I'll show it to you guys, where he talks about how it's always Bill Nye defending on like news channels, like, defending the climate change angle. So I'll have to pull that up on break and we can watch that. It's really funny. So next week what we're going to talk about is U.S. global engagement and free speech. Free speech is always a student favorite in this class. So that'll be an interesting class. And then in week 7 we'll do Brexit and the Cuba-U.S. relations, which I initially meant to do this week, but I rearranged. And then the last week, which is week 7.5, we're going to kind of do a grab bag. And I'm going to give students an opportunity to maybe give some opinions on things that they want to talk about the last week of class. Maybe it's cybersecurity, net neutrality. I know Jason's interested in that. Some other students are interested in that. So kind of just do a grab bag. There's not going to be a quiz in week 7.5. Your last quiz will be in week 7. So and you guys can just kind of finish working on your final projects, your reflection essay, and then that blended participation assignment in that last kind of overhang week that we're going to have. All right. You also have a course survey right here that you guys can begin taking. If you hate me, Ethan, this is a perfect opportunity to unleash your opinion on me. It's anonymous. I can't see. It just tells me student 1, student 2, student 3, etc. You can put your name on it, Ethan, yes, if you really want to know. I mean, we all know how you feel, so it's all right. But yeah, UAT, for those of you that are new here, they really do take a lot of consideration to what students have to say in these surveys. I know a lot of schools will give you the survey and they never really look at the data, but they kind of overanalyze the data. So your opinions and your views actually really carry a lot of weight with the administration. So this is a good opportunity to tell us what you think. Okay, so any questions on what we have coming up or where we're at in class? Everyone seems to be doing pretty well and keeping up with everything. Okay. So this week, all you have is a quiz, so just keep that in mind. That's due this Sunday. Now, for those students that are online, I put an announcement up this morning. So if you guys can disregard this for anyone that's here in ground, because I'm going to pass these documents out to you. But we're going to examine a 6-page summary of the Paris Climate Agreement. I was going to have this originally, I was going to break you guys up in groups and have you read parts of the Paris Climate Agreement. But just for the sake of time, we don't have a lot of time for that, and it's dreadfully boring because I read it. And it's like really awful. So I thought I have a 6-page, pretty comprehensive summary of the key points that we'll look at today. So you guys will be reading that. And then there's also a fact-checking document about Trump's reasons for pulling out of the agreement. I'm passing that out to you guys. But if you're online, you can click here to access the file. And then this is the website it actually comes from. If any of you want to just check out that source and its viability. It's actually a Canadian source. It's called Global News. What's that? I know, hey, Canadians, hey, right? Okay, so that'll be in the announcements for any online students. Okay, so today in history, Prince was born. So if you enjoy a good Purple Rain or When Doves Fly, I know it's probably Ethan's favorite album. His birthday is today, so. And then yesterday was a big day in history of D-Day, right? The D-Day invasion, right, in 1944. 73rd, I think, if I'm doing the math right. It was 1944. I don't know. Math is hard, guys. So it was a long time ago, though. So there we go. All right. So like I said, we are going to spend the first part of class watching this Climate of Doubt film. But before we start, do you guys want to note anything you've noticed in the media? Anything coming up? Anything that you've seen since Monday, since we met in class?
I haven't heard anything, but I know you have, so inform us.
You know I have, right? Well, there actually hasn't been too much more about the London attacks other than they've identified all of the attackers. Virgil, what did you want to bring up?
That girl leaked some secret documents.
Ah, yes. Okay, so that's a really good point. So there's a news outlet called The Intercept, which you guys might have noticed you read an article from during the media assignment. I actually really like this news outlet. They actually they use a lot of whistleblowers. They kind of support that. So, but they're a good independent news source. They run on donations. They're not like a typical mainstream like CNN or MSNBC or Fox or something. But they do use a lot of anonymous sources. So they publish the source, and I guess by the way they published it, they didn't get rid of like some identifying information or something, but they found out who leaked it. The Intercept didn't say who leaked it. They always protect their sources, but the government arrested this woman. She's like a 25-year-old NSA contractor. So she's going to go on trial under, it always is a contractor, yeah. It seems like that, right? And so she's going to go on trial for, under the Espionage Act. And before people like diss the Trump administration for this, I want to point out that Obama's administration actually used that they prosecuted the most whistleblowers and anonymous source leakers than any other president under that Espionage Act. So this isn't anything new for an administration to want to plug these leaks. You can't really blame the Trump administration for wanting to put those leaks. Now, do you guys know what's going on tomorrow?
Oh, the guy's testifying.
Yeah, Comey's testifying tomorrow. So James Comey, the FBI director, yeah. So he's going to testify. So I'm assuming that lots of people are probably going to call in sick to work. It's at like 7 in the morning our time. I think it's 10 a.m. Eastern. Even this morning there were intelligence chiefs testifying for something about the Russia stuff. And CNN was streaming it. So I'm assuming that the big networks are going to be streaming it. And it'll probably be on C-SPAN as well. So that'll be interesting. I think that it'll either be explosive or just kind of like a letdown for the left, right? So we'll see what comes out of that, but that's something to keep an eye on. Anything else you guys notice?
Is there like an important election in Britain coming up?
Yeah, so there's the way that they do elections in England or in Britain is a little bit different, but yeah, there's an election between the current government right now under Theresa May and then what they call the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, which is kind of their left liberal party. But Theresa May's government is still kind of favored to win that, but we'll see. That is coming up. So you do read the news.
Yeah.
You see some things in the media. Good job. Okay, anything else before we get this started? Good. We're going to try to get through most of it. It's 15 minutes, so I might cut it off at some point. But it really does give a good background on how we get to this point where it became so politicized. Because based off what Jill had to say, well, first of all, is anyone in here a scientist? Right. So we have to listen to scientists, right? And so when, the consensus is 97% of scientists, are on board with this issue of climate change, that's something I take very seriously. And if people want to discount it, that's fine. But you also have to show peer-reviewed sources. You have to show your actual scientific background. You can't just be like, well, Ted Cruz said that climate change isn't real. And he's my senator, so I'm not, I'm going to listen to him, right? So we have to really look at the overwhelming amount of scientists. It's not like 51% of scientists are saying this, right? Like 97%. So why did we get to a point where all of a sudden in the last several years people are discounting scientists, right? Like we've always used to venerate scientists, right? Like they've always been held really high places in society because of their work and the information that they give the public. So this kind of gives you that background, and I think it's a good background to have when we look at the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement and when we start looking at that in the second half of class. So just sit back, enjoy.
Does Neil deGrasse Tyson believe in climate change?
I'm sure he does, yeah.
I do now.
So because he does?
He's not man.
He's your man? Okay. Okay.
The findings are blunt. Climate change is happening.
In the last election, few seemed to doubt that climate change was real. Climate change poses a growing danger.
The risks of climate change are real.
But since then, a successful campaign has been waged to introduce doubt about the science.
This massive global conspiracy to make a certain case.
If you pay scientists enough money, they'll find what you want them to find.
They are cooking the data.
Scientific malpractice.
Do you think the science is being hyped on global warming?
Oh, very definitely, yes.
Correspondent John Hockenberry investigates.
The politics have gotten to the point where people just don't want to listen to science.
How did it happen? And who's behind it? Tonight, Climate of Doubt.
Chicago is now under full national security.
In fact, a no-fly zone is in effect.
Yes, we have some guests in town, and we down enjoyed some of the festivities yesterday.
It was a big weekend in Chicago. Last spring, the president was in town, along with the leaders of NATO, to discuss threats to global security and nuclear proliferation. At a huge convention center, the eyes of the world were watching. But across town, in a small hotel ballroom, the fate of the world was also on the agenda.
Everything will be revealed.
The eyes of the world might have missed this gathering.
For your Al Gore snow job.
The message here is that man-made global climate change is a myth, a hoax. This conference is an annual pilgrimage for the key skeptics. We came here to understand how they have made their views a mainstream fact of American politics. They think of themselves as rebels up against the biggest players in science, government, and the media.
Wind and solar are based on public fear of global warming, and the mainstream media has pretty much given up its role as an independent reporter on these things and has become an advocate.
If you add up all of the resources of our side of the debate and all of the resources of the other side of the debate, this is a David versus Goliath story.
You're doing pretty well.
There are holdouts among the urban bicoastal elite, but I think we've won the debate with the American people in the heartland, the people who get their hands dirty, people who dig up stuff, grow stuff, and make stuff for a living, people who have a closer relationship to tangible reality, to stuff.
We need to keep banging away on the science.
Myron Ebell chairs a group called the Cooler Heads Coalition, one of a team of skilled policy advocates driving a remarkable turnaround that has already changed the U.S. political landscape.
Warming isn't, in fact, accelerating. In fact, there's been none for 15 years.
There's Christopher Monckton, a big draw at these meetings, who brings the skeptics to their feet every time. Republican Congressman James Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin, Vice Chairman of the House Science Committee.
Paul Krugman accused my colleagues and me of treason against the planet.
There's Chris Horner from the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
They sold it as economic salvation. This is our way out.
And James Taylor, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute, organizer of this gathering.
The debate, indeed, is over.
In the years prior to 2007, the 2008 elections, we actually heard from many folks that we should tone it down on global warming. We should not talk about the issue because the court of public opinion had already decided, and we were on the losing end. But we believe that if we present the case to the American people and it resonates, if they get it, then that's going to work its way up the political stepladder.
You've really changed the game on global warming.
Well, I certainly hope so.
These political messengers rely on a small group of outspoken scientific contrarians, like climatologist Pat Michaels of the libertarian Cato Institute.
Every paragraph can be contended.
Willie Soon is an astrophysicist who studies the sun and stars.
Is that you just found a mechanism to transport anything from the tropics to the Arctic.
They cannot fit northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere.
And Fred Singer, the veteran scientist at these proceedings, he's a retired physicist once responsible for government weather satellites, who tells people the climate needs no help from worried humans.
Adjustable parameters. Climate, to me, has become a non-issue. It's a phantom issue. There's nothing wrong with climate. It will change no matter what we do. It'll get colder, it'll get warmer. We just have to wait a little.
Singer says he's dedicated to explaining his theories about global warming.
What keeps you going? What's your motivation?
Basically, I like to see good science being done and protected. I think I'm fighting here for scientific truth. That's important to me.
Do you think the science is being hyped on global warming?
Oh, very definitely, yes.
Armed with that conviction, this team of skilled political messengers and contrarians has certainly changed the game. In just 4 years, the number of Americans who agree global warming is man-made has dropped to about half.
We should get these books, I think.
It's a message that is inspiring a new generation of skeptics.
I would like to really listen to these scientists who came and talk and have dedicated their lives to debunking this fallacy, so to speak.
Once upon a time, what these people call a fallacy had another name: the truth.
You've heard of off the charts. Within less than 50 years, it'll be here. The so-called skeptics...
In 2006, the film An Inconvenient Truth told a disturbing story and galvanized public awareness about the climate.
And now to a new report on global warming from a prestigious panel of scientists convened by the UN.
There's a new grim report out today from
This comprehensive report in 2007 took it to another level. Scientists from 30 nations concluded that global warming is unequivocal and that human activity is mostly the cause.
Countries went over it. It is the definitive report on global warming, and it's frightening.
I call upon the Peace Prize laureate for 2007, Al Gore, to...
The UN scientists and former Vice President Al Gore would share the Nobel Peace Prize. The cause had a consensus and a credible leader. The skeptics would take on both.
I think Al Gore was probably the best thing that could happen to global warming skeptics.
From my perspective, Al Gore was the perfect proponent and leader of the global warming alarmists because he's very politically divisive and controversial.
I think it was his tone and manner. He did at a certain point come across as holier than thou, and that's another thing about Americans. They're not really big on holier than thou.
Personalizing the attacks was part of an approach that was immediately embraced and amplified by friendly media.
That is the former vice president getting off that plane into a town car, by the way, not a hybrid.
He equates a failure to recycle aluminum cans with the Holocaust.
He wants to be a superhero action figure, and...
Myra Nabel was acting on a broad strategy he helped create more than a decade ago. In this 1998 action plan, victory will be achieved, it said, when the public recognizes uncertainties in climate science. Today at the Washington, D.C. headquarters of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a free market think tank, you can see Myra Nabel's philosophy proudly displayed on the walls.
They're all CEI authors. What we're fighting is the expansion of government, and there are many pretexts for expanding government.
Opposing government action on climate change to defend American freedom is a perfect fit.
We felt that if you concede the science is settled and that there's a consensus, you cannot, the moral high ground has been ceded to the alarmists.
So you had to go to work and break down this consensus.
Yes, and we did it because we believed that the consensus was phony. We believed that the so-called global warming consensus was not based on science, but was a political consensus, which included a number of scientists.
In 2009, agreement on global warming seemed part of the solid wave of enthusiasm that elected Barack Obama.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
With the changing of the guard in Washington, there was a bipartisan call to action, a sense of inevitability.
Speaker, the President of the United States.
An idea that for years had struggled for attention in Congress would get its moment of truth.
So I ask this Congress to send me legislation that places a market-based cap on carbon...
The president backed the so-called cap-and-trade approach, a system of regulations and financial incentives to eventually reduce the emission of carbon into the atmosphere.
It seemed there was consensus on climate change.
There was an uneasy consensus, but the people who have always objected to change had not yet really engaged. And because of the consensus, because there was a sense that there was going to be movement, that galvanized the action of the people who oppose it.
The American people hadn't focused on these issues until it actually came to a vote in Congress on a bill to implement these policies.
Today's hearing is on
the soft consensus for taking action ran into the bitter partisan divisions in Congress. Congressional hearings on cap and trade would become a stage where opposing views would get equal time.
Professor Schrag, you just heard what Dr. Michael said.
Pro-cap and trade lawmakers would call leading climate scientists and policymakers to make the argument for action now.
It's very clear from that estimate that in fact we're in for bigger trouble.
One of the things that we've already seen is many observed changes in the climate.
Global climate change is a serious threat to our national security.
The skeptics had their own witnesses. They testified that nothing was settled and that global warming might actually be good for the planet.
It's necessary.
Say that again. Carbon dioxide is what?
It's plant food.
It's plant food.
Yeah.
The testimony of the skeptics argued for a timeout. There was enough uncertainty, they said, to justify delay.
The right response to the non-problem of global warming, first slide please, is to have the courage to do nothing.
But the fear of catastrophic man-made global warming is mistaken.
This demonstration shows that the oft-repeated mantra in Washington, quote, the science is settled, is not true at all. If climate change is
skeptics had found a seat at the table, but the scientific consensus still had the momentum. When cap and trade came up for a vote in the House in 2009, it passed, with 8 Republicans on board.
The bill is passed.
The Waxman-Markey cap and trade bill passed the House very narrowly, 219 to 212. The members of the Senate, who were going to take it up in July, went home for the 4th of July recess. And they got an earful from their constituents.
You don't trust me?
Some of your other votes, such as cap and trade. We are not for more government.
The Tea Party saw a frightening expansion of government in the health care plan and the push for cap and trade.
Section 9, you're a traitor. You betrayed the nation, you betrayed the state.
The people of this country were really not concerned one way or the other on this issue until the economy started going south in 2008.
Was that an opportunity to push back on climate change, the recession?
It sure was.
I'm Tim Phillips, president of Americans for Prosperity. We're here in Billings, Montana.
What part did you play? We certainly did TV ads, radio ads, social media. We did rallies, events. We launched something we called Hot Air.
And we're sending the message to Senator Baucus and Senator Tester to vote no on this job-killing, tax-increasing cap and trade.
We got a hot air balloon, put a banner on the side of it that said cap and trade means higher taxes, lost jobs, less freedom. And we went all over the country doing events and stirring up grassroots anger and frustration, concern.
Cap and trade will slow the economy and cost American jobs.
Americans for Prosperity's well-financed campaign was an aggressive one. Ads that went after cap and trade policy
can't afford the cap and trade tax.
And said the science was a hoax.
Congress should stop wasting our money and focus on real problems.
Isn't it time Congress listened to the rest of us?
In the Tea Party's anti-tax, anti-big government message, you could now hear the skeptic mantra attacking climate science and cap and trade.
And taxing America to death and our children.
At some Tea Party events, global warming skeptics were a big draw.
Gives me great pleasure to welcome Lord Monkton.
Introduced like a professional wrestler, Christopher Monkton is a former British journalist who admits he has no scientific qualifications.
Now we are met on a great battlefield of a new civil war.
But here, whipping up the crowd is his indisputable expertise.
That in American speak, you have a word for global warming. Can someone tell me what it is? Altogether, global warming is...
Events like these fertilized the growing public doubt about climate change that was beginning to register with senators. With widespread anxiety over a shrinking economy, cap and trade was tabled in the Senate. The momentum towards action on global warming was vanishing.
I often say, if you ever wonder as an activist on our side, are you making a difference? Just look at cap and trade. January of '09, you had a president with 60 votes in the Senate, then Speaker Pelosi with a 50-plus seat majority, and cap and trade was at the top of their agenda. And in the end, they were beaten.
You've said if we win the science argument, I think it's game, set, and match. Why do you want to win the science argument?
If the science argument is won, I do think it would pull out the final underpinning of this legislative effort and this regulatory effort the left is undertaking.
Diminish the credibility of the scientific consensus, and action on climate change grinds to a halt. At a conference in Long Island, we witnessed how these skeptics build their message of doubt. We once again saw Fred Singer.
This is a conference mainly for medical doctors.
Delivering his message to a group of physicians who seemed eager to hear it.
Tell me that there hasn't been any perceptible trend. You essentially get no warming trend. In the last 10 years, there hasn't been a warming. We don't know why that is, but one doesn't see any warming in the observations. There's no trend.
No warming in the last 10 years? No long-term trend? Climate scientists would say that's playing games with the data.
You can, if you want, very carefully select the endpoints of your time series, the starting month and the ending month. And you can come up with, maybe you can come up with something that shows no warming.
In a sense, what Dessler is saying is that you can do this at home. On a complex chart, depending on the beginning points X and ending points Y, you can select a trend line that does indeed show temperature going down.
Could I pick 10 years of world history and show a climate cooling?
Oh, you could totally do that. In fact, you could take the entire climate history that we have in the instrumental record and you could find cooling trends every 10 years.
Cooling trends between 1958 and 1969, 1969 and 1978, 1978 and 1987, and so on. Scientists have a name for this. They call it going down the up escalator.
You pick the endpoints and you could find any particular year as part of a cooling year. But actually, the whole thing has been moving up.
If you look at all of the data, it's quite clear that the warming is continuing.
So the 2000s was the warmest decade on record. The 1990s was the warmest decade before that. The 1980s before that. And most of us in the field of climate science expect, but we can't be sure, we expect that the 2010s will be warmer than the 2000s.
Against the backdrop of all the pressure from skeptic groups, Congress ordered a comprehensive review of climate change research by the National Academy of Sciences. The findings came back even stronger on human-caused climate change, and a subsequent study showed 97% of active climate scientists agreed.
What's settled here on climate change?
Virtually every place on Earth is warming up, and people who've tried to go back and scrub the data, like is there a mistake with the way they're making these measurements, they've all concluded that no, the people who are doing this work at the key places around the world are agreeing with each other.
What's the bottom line, though, on human-caused global warming? I raised my hand in a high school science class, and you're the teacher. Are humans causing the global warming we're seeing? What's your answer?
Mostly, yeah. Scientists are trying to shoot it down all the time, and years and years and years, nobody's been able to. So at some point, you have to say, maybe it's right.
Here's what the National Academy of Sciences report actually says.
Climate change is occurring and is largely caused by human activities and poses a significant risk for a broad range of human and natural systems. You say that's false.
Yes.
False.
False.
And if most of the climate scientists believe that statement, they're deluded?
Yes.
And you're seeing something they're not seeing?
Yes.
So it's 97% of them and one of you.
Oh, well, you can put it that way if you like, but I don't think that's the way it works. There's hundreds of us, hundreds, thousands of us. Look, 31,000 scientists and engineers signed a statement to the contrary to what you just read.
The Oregon petition?
Yes.
The 14-year-old petition is not exactly an exclusive club. A Bachelor of Science degree is all it takes to get you on the list. This document, skeptics claim, counters the scientific consensus on global warming.
Ethan could be in that.
Now, were they all scientists?
Yes. 1/3 of them have PhDs. Look, they're not specialists in climate
Well,
studies.
some were celebrities and, right?
Yeah.
It's a time-honored tactic by the skeptics, authentic-looking documents and reports that don't stand up to independent scrutiny. Singer also signed the Oregon petition, and this is not his first time going up against accepted science.
Was the science around chlorofluorocarbons hyped? The science around secondhand smoke hyped? The science around the ozone layer hyped, going back 10, 15, 20 years?
I'm happy to discuss all of these, since I've been deeply involved in these topics that you mentioned. Let me start with secondhand smoke.
Fred Singer is, I think, a professional contrarian. When I was in graduate school, I worked on stratospheric ozone depletion. And Fred would call me when I was in grad school and talk to me about how he didn't think humans were depleting ozone. And before that, he had real questions about whether humans were causing acid rain. And he didn't think that nuclear winter was sound science. And he really criticized the work that connected secondhand smoke to health impacts. And now he doesn't think global warming is an issue.
Al Gore making his case. So is global warming fact or fiction? Let's get to it.
But Fred Singer's case was bolstered when in November of 2009, the skeptics got a break that would put climate scientists on the defensive.
Falsified results. It's the fraud stupid to oversimplify it. That's
An apparent scandal, and skeptics made the most of it.
Some stolen emails.
It erupted out of more than 1,000 hacked emails, which included scientists' internal conversations about global temperature data.
These people have already been revealed as not having any honor. Now they're being revealed as not having a sense of shame.
A few suspicious-seeming emails taken out of context would become ClimateGate. Even though 9 subsequent investigations would find no tampering with data, the impact of these emails would live on.
Even the lady in the supermarket has heard of the ClimateGate emails that purport to show that scientists have fabricated data or manipulated data, and that the whole idea of global warming has been proven to be a hoax. That is completely ridiculous. Continuing to use those emails as evidence that global warming is not real is inaccurate. By continuing to use those emails to slander the scientific reputation, not only of those individual scientists, but of a field as a whole, is irresponsible.
Thousands of documents and internal emails coming out.
Katharine Hayhoe personally felt the effects of ClimateGate, a climate scientist at Texas Tech in the Panhandle. She's the lead author of a federal research report detailing the impact of global warming in the U.S.
The emails are real. Read the Associated Press.
She spends every Sunday in the church where her husband preaches.
You've heard this verse, maybe some of us, since we were this high.
I think the perception is often that climate scientists are godless tree-hugging liberals out to suck all the money out of the average person and use it all to fund all of this research.
How much of this is a part of your worldview?
My faith is integral to who I am. That's what defines me, not what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so when I study the planet, I feel as if I'm studying something that God created.
After she wrote a chapter on climate change for a book on environmental policy, a private group suddenly requested her emails.
Just before Christmas this past year, I got my first Freedom of Information Act request. And it was a bit of a shock.
The charge is that you use taxpayers' money to engage in your personal activism about climate change.
Mm-hmm. Every single professor, when invited to write a submitted chapter for an edited volume to be published by an academic press, pro bono, would say, yes, that's part of our resume. That's part of what we're asked at the end of each year. Did you write any edited book chapters? So it's part of our job to do that.
To write stuff?
Yes.
American Tradition Institute, restoring science, accountability.
The group requesting Katharine Hayhoe's emails is the American Tradition Institute.
The argument behind the climate movement that didn't withstand scrutiny generally.
Here is their chief lawyer, Chris Horner, who wrote the request. Chris Horner would not speak with Frontline on camera, but ATI told us they were just looking for insights into how scientists made their deliberations. Texas A&M scientist Andrew Dessler is an expert on how clouds relate to climate change. He became a target of the American Tradition Institute after one quote in a front-page New York Times article. Destler received a legal request for emails the next morning.
And I actually had the first quote in the story. And within hours of that story coming out, the university received a FOIA request for my email. The goal of this was to try to find something in the emails that would be used to embarrass climate science. They were just rolling the dice. It was completely random. They had no reason to think that there was anything improper, but they were hoping to hit the jackpot like they did with ClimateGate.
As we began our reporting, ATI requested emails climate scientists might have sent to Frontline.
You know, I don't let it stop me. I fully expect that after this program airs, I'll get another FOIA request for all of my emails with you. And you know, I'll just deal with that. As a climate scientist, I think a lot about the future. It goes with the job. And I want to make sure that in 50 years or 100 years or 200 years, nobody can ever say we didn't warn them.
This summer at the Washington, D.C. Defending the Dream Summit for the group Americans for Prosperity, they have their own warning. Beware the leftist agenda that they believe underlies the climate change movement. Reducing emissions is cover for reducing freedom, they say. And they have the means to carry their free market message anywhere in the U.S.
This is our 6th annual Defending the American Dream Summit. We launched these in the fall of 2007. It's a great way to bring activists together from around the country to kind of bond to the organization. And also, it's good to have a bunch of free market conservatives in D.C. occasionally as well.
How does free market conservatism relate to climate change and the scientific argument over...
It doesn't to the scientific side. It very much so relates to the policies that the left pushes in the name of global warming. I mean, every once in a while, I'll make a statement about the science, but that's the tiny percentage of what we do and how we spend our money.
Oh, you win on the policy, you win on the science.
I think so. I do.
This is a community of skeptics. At the AFP rally, I ran into Myron Ebell, a supportive attendee and a speaker.
Why are you here?
Well, these are the grassroots that, support our side. This is essentially a more organized form of a Tea Party group, right? A better funded.
You've said, we've made great headway. What it means for candidates on the Republican side is if you buy into green energy or if you play footsie on this issue, you do so at your political peril.
You do, absolutely. And that's a big change, and it is important. Again, I remember 4 or 5 or even 3 years ago, John, a lot of Republicans, they would play games with this. They would say, okay, well, gosh, I think I need a green energy agenda, but I won't go all the way and support cap and trade. They did. They try to walk down the middle, and that's wrong. I think it's philosophically inconsistent, but it's also politically disadvantageous, and we've worked hard to make that so, by the way.
The left has had the edge as long as I can remember. They march out to the town square, whatever they're told to do, under the direction and coercion of the union leadership.
One thing we've changed with AFP is we now have an army too. And we can do calls and emails and letters and rallies, events, and pressure. And I think that's made a big difference. Our side didn't have that 5 or 6 years ago on this issue. We do now. And I do think it's a new day for that reason.
This new day has dramatically transformed the way lawmakers approach global warming on Capitol Hill. Suddenly, the news was who wasn't talking about it.
Fred Upton, who is chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, he's charged with writing regulations that would control climate change emissions. And when I asked him this question, do you think climate change is causing the Earth to become warmer? And he smiled, nice guy, and said, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to answer that. And he turned around and went onto the House floor, where I can't, as a reporter, I'm not allowed to go.
Coral Davenport reports on energy and environmental issues for the National Journal.
For him to say, I don't want to talk about this, is that like the chairman of the Armed Services Committee saying, I don't want to talk about the Pentagon?
Absolutely, yes. But I should say that does seem to be a change in Chairman Upton's views before he took on this leadership. Fred Upton was, has long been a moderate who's worked on these issues, who's reached across the aisle on these issues. Before he became chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, on his website, he had the phrase that climate change is a problem. That was deleted after he became chairman of the House Energy Committee. So we're definitely seeing a shift on this.
Chairman Upton declined Frontline's request for an interview. But the congressman wasn't the only one not talking. In 2011, the National Journal tried to poll all GOP lawmakers on climate change.
I came up with the idea to ask every Republican member of Congress 3 simple questions about climate change. They're very simple. They're basically, do you think that climate change is causing the Earth to become warmer?
Straightforward.
How much, if any of that, do you think is attributable to human activity? And what's the appropriate government response? And normally, lawmakers love to answer questions. They love to opine. This was amazing. Members of Congress did not want to answer the question. In some cases, they just said straight up, I'm not going to answer that. In some cases, what was really amazing is they literally ran into an elevator and the elevator closed when I asked.
With their majority in the House, GOP lawmakers took steps to keep the issue from coming up at all, including dissolving the official House Committee on Global Warming.
Why did you reach out only to Republicans on this?
It's rare to find a Democrat who will outright, flatly question or deny the basic scientific precepts of climate change.
This new political environment has been an opportunity for lawmakers like Republican James Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin to claim they are the new mainstream view on global warming.
Do you believe global warming is caused by the activity of human beings?
Partially, but not completely.
Percentage?
Can't predict that.
30%, 50%?
Well, I know it's not 0 and I know it's not 100. I can't tell you what number it is in between.
If 97% of scientists say it is mostly or significantly caused by human activity, what do you say to that?
They are entitled to their opinion, but they are going to have...
Do you think this will ever be settled scientifically if 97% consensus doesn't settle it for you?
Well, I think that it's up to the scientists and their supporters to convince the public that this is the right thing to do. And the supporters of that side of the argument in the Congress have been a huge flop.
I visited one of the key Democrats on this issue, Massachusetts Senator John Kerry. What had happened to all the momentum of 4 years ago?
Well, American politics is being completely defined by huge sums of money. We had really a very broad coalition of people who believed that we ought to move forward and do something. But as the campaign of fear built up, people began to retreat. They spent huge sums of money in a campaign of major disinformation that had an impact, had a profound impact. And it has now made many people in public life very gun-shy because they're afraid of having those amounts of money spent against them.
This is what they fear. What happened in 2010 to 6-term South Carolina Congressman Bob Inglis, a Republican who once thought he was a safe incumbent in his solidly red state.
You know, I'm a pretty conservative fella. I got a 93 American Conservative Union rating, 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the ADA, Americans for Democratic Action, a liberal group, and 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO. I demand a recount. I wanted a 0.
But Inglis does accept the scientific consensus on global warming and favors legislation to curb the effects of CO2 in the atmosphere. He faced a Tea Party rebellion in his primary.
I'm at a big tent gathering in Spartanburg County. Bunch of Republicans underneath a great big tent. Comes a question to me, yes or no, do you believe in human causation on climate change? Well, I had a bad habit of answering questions, so I said, yes. Boo, hiss comes the crowd. I was blasted out from underneath the tent. And so, I mean, there were a couple 100, 300 people there. I mean, it was intense.
There we are. He was pounded in commercials and on talk radio.
It became a oft-repeated theme on talk radio, and that is a major source of information, of course, for Republican primary voters. They were hearing. Inglis has left the reservation. He's over there somewhere with Al Gore. So how are things around here?
It's slow. How the economy is way off.
When you get the financial collapse going, That's what made it possible for some well-spent money to blow doubt into the science, because, you know, the bankers failed us, the federal government's failing us, it's spending too much money, and these scientists who are funded by that federal government, they're probably in it too, and besides, they're godless liberals.
Inglis was defeated.
Bob Inglis was defeated in a Republican primary 79 to 21%. Now, how many times has an incumbent who isn't in prison or facing a prison sentence lost his own primary by 79 to 21%? This was overwhelming. But what's happened is...
The smile on your face suggests, man, we won one.
Of course we won one.
We're on the record. And our grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, are going to read.
This climate hearing in the Lame Duck Congress was Inglis's last.
Your child is sick. 98 doctors say treat him this way. 2 say no, this other is the way to go. I'll go with the 2. You're taking a big risk with those kids.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis.
It was a very key factor in 10 to 15 congressional districts in the 2010 election, where strong supporters of climate change legislation ended up being defeated.
And there is nothing like a loss in an election to promote fear in the survivors. And that's exactly what happened in the United States Congress.
Beyond Washington, in wave after wave, the skeptic tactic of fighting scientific warnings with doubt and delay was finding success. Tennessee passed a law allowing the views of climate change skeptics to be taught in schools. A Virginia state legislator cut the words sea level rise from an official request to study coastal communities, calling it a left-wing term.
They go away with almost every storm, major storm.
Here in North Carolina, a warning from scientists on sea level rise would cause politicians to try and legislate climate change out of existence.
Yes, they're here to try to protect these houses. They're here to try to...
In 2010, 19 scientists on a state commission warned of a possible sea level rise by the end of the century.
Here you get an idea of the nature of these dunes.
Geologist Stanley Riggs was one of the scientists.
What we were asked to do is to develop what is the history of sea level rise and what can North Carolina expect 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now.
The report said to expect a 39-inch ocean rise, an estimate in the middle of a range consistent with other predictions for the region.
39 inches, if that comes to pass here, everything we'd see.
This town will be underwater.
The Commission's warning was seen as a threat by a coastal economic development group, NC20.
Right now. Now you add the flood from a storm, hurricane, whatever, and that...
Tom Thompson is the group's chairman.
They had a draft policy which mandated that everything be designed and constructed to a 39-inch sea level rise. People that recommended we plan immediately for 39 inches did not understand the economic consequences.
Thompson is a skeptic himself and fears scientists and their warnings more than he fears any climate change.
I'm going to stop it there for the sake of time. I think it brought up some good points, though. Okay, maybe a little depressing. So 10-minute break. Come back at 11:30. When you come back in, please grab one of each of these documents that we're going to go over. And that's where we stand right now. So 10 minutes. So if you're online, just skip ahead 10 minutes. I'm going to mute while we are on there.
You are now muted.
I am now muted.
Where's the front line of the sort about the Flat Earth Society?
The what?
The Flat Earth.
Oh, I know, right? I don't even think Frontline is going to give them any credibility at all. These things make me so mad, though, like watching that. It just makes me like, it's about money. Right? It's all about money.
It's ridiculous.
And I think that guy, that Martin Ebel guy, like the old white dude, is like, I know, right? He's writing all these books. He's making money off of it. He dissents anything. So if scientists said climate change isn't real, he would say, no, it is real.
Oh, he's the guy that had like secondhand smoke.
Yeah, exactly. So he's writing books. He's making money off of dissenting. He's just dissenting for the sake of dissenting.
Yeah.
You know?
he's not trying to put up a valid argument.
No.
He's just out to make it look
Yep.
He doesn't care if he looks stupid.
I know.
Sun is the center of the universe now. Earth is the center of the universe.
Earth is. America.
America
is the center of the universe.
America is the center of the universe. Donald Trump is God.
His approval ratings are 34%. That just came out.
What?
I just got a notification on Twitter that his approval ratings, according to a Quinnipiac poll, is at 34%.
Trump's?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
I mean, that's just one poll, but that's,
Oh, yeah.
that's
Hey, it
dangerously
still
low.
speaks. It still
Yeah.
speaks.
Iowa?
Because we don't have a team.
Oh, that's true, you don't have, because you're Iowa.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know why I picked the Lions. The story is I liked The Lion King as a kid. And for some reason, I just gravitated towards them.
I did like that movie as a kid, too.
But I can't sell out and switch teams because the minute I do, they're going to win the Super Bowl. I'm going to make a trader.
They're not going to win a Super Bowl.
22 years of being loyal.
How's that working out for you?
2008 was rough.
Was it?
That was the year we didn't win a single game. We were the first ever.
Oh, yeah. That was embarrassing,
That
huh?
was pretty bad.
Well,
We're getting there, though.
I don't really follow sports ball, so.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say sports ball?
Mhm.
Oh,
That's my generic term for all.
Do you understand why I hate her and she's the worst? So hold on, you run marathons and do all those other like crazy marathon bullshit, but you won't watch sports.
Well, I have a problem with guys that play sports ball that make $10 million a year.
I got a problem with old white people saying that climate change isn't real.
I do too. Me too.
We'll stop talking about it when we do something about it.
What do we do about it? That's what we're gonna talk about next.
Plague.
A plague on your home.
You know, plague in general.
Say a plague?
It's gonna happen.
I-
We're
listen,
ripe for a plague.
If we have a plague, I will take over the team and be a part of that plague.
You'll be patient zero?
Yeah. And if I'm the cure, I'm gonna kill myself. It's like, listen, millions of people are gonna die. We need your blood. Like, nah.
It's a terrible idea.
Is it?
You're not gonna be the cure.
I would now.
You're gonna be the problem.
I'd be the cause.
Yeah.
An 18-wheeler full of beer just flipped over here in Tempe.
What?
All the
Class
beer-
dismissed.
Where? Let's
We're
go.
out.
It's literally live on news right now.
Where is it? Where?
Yeah, seriously, where? It's here in Tempe. It doesn't say exactly. Let's go help them clean it up.
Okay, let's all go in different directions.
Make like a Facebook chat with scatter, walkie-talkie.
Scatter!
Baseline's clear over.
And then when I find it, I'm not gonna tell anyone.
I'll go buy
Well,
a dog.
we won't tell Ethan.
Okay.
I may just finish what's in my mouth. And I know I meant for you to hear it.
Sweet.
There's a dip off upstairs with all the faculty and stuff. I just ate a whole bunch of food. It's really good. No.
I was gonna grab some.
All right, guys. So, me swallow what's in my mouth, and we'll get going. All right. I think everyone's back. Did everyone grab one of each? Okay, one of each, please. Don't hesitate. Just barge your way in there, Ethan.
I didn't want to hold his hand.
We're gonna come to them in a minute, but this saves time with me passing stuff out.
Sure.
Oh, that was so good. Oh my God.
Can we go ahead and assume this is the nugget?
No.
You were wrong.
There is a nugget after this, though. Okay.
You are now unmuted.
Okay, so we're back if you are online or watching this as a recording. All right, so any key points you guys wanted to bring up that you thought were interesting or maybe infuriating from that video?
My thing is like, okay, so if climate change is real, and well, okay, I believe it is.
Okay, but
what is the point of arguing that it isn't? I understand it's a whole money thing, but like, what is the point of your life arguing that it isn't real?
I don't know what the point is. Money, like, as I was talking to Jason on the break, is when I look at that guy, Ebel, the older white guy who was talking about secondhand smoke and all that. I say older white guy because there's like a lot of older white guys in there. Yeah, and the guy that's like that thinks everything is a hoax. Did you guys notice that he sells a lot of books, right? So he's pandering to a group that he realizes he can profit off of, right? So I feel like he's the type of person that even if climate scientists said climate change isn't real, he would then say it is real, right? As a way to there's always going to be dissenters in every single thing. There's no way you're going to get every single person in the world to agree on the same thing, all right? That's just not going to happen. It's an impossibility. So I think those people are actually kind of smart entrepreneurs in the sense of like they see a market, right? And they can exploit that market and make some money off of them. What else do you guys think off of that? Anything interesting or just stuck out to you? What do you think, Ivan?
Oh, well, just like people, I guess, don't want to change their lifestyle.
Right.
They
And-
almost are Priuses.
Okay, and that's a good point, and I wanted to bring that up when they were talking about Al Gore, right? So Al Gore, did you guys see his movie in 2006, Inconvenient Truth?
With the Man Bear Pig, yeah.
No, not but so when that comes out, they made a good point in that video. Him being such a politicized figure as being the former vice president, right, was kind of a good thing for the anti-climate science people. They could jump on that and they could kind of use him to discredit anything. And then on Fox News and other news organizations, they were chiding him for using planes and non-hybrid cars. But the problem with that argument is saying, okay, so if you are a climate change warrior or whatever, you can't use any of the things that society has set up. That's just not how it works. Like, I have to fly next month to 2 different cities, and for the sake of time, I have to fly. You know, I can't drive to Chicago, I can't drive to DC, right? I've got to fly. Obviously, I feel like, yeah, I agree with climate change, but the way that's the issue, right? It's the way our society is set up, our infrastructure is difficult. And then if you do want to buy a hybrid car, have you guys seen how expensive they are? Right? If you wanted to get a Tesla, and even though Tesla made a cheaper model, there's still a huge waiting list, right, to get on that. So it's not as easy to say, oh, well, you're using a plane or you're using a car that's not hybrid, so whatever you're saying is I can discount. I think that's kind of a really poor argument to use. I think there's maybe better arguments you could use if you want to come up with a more convincing argument.
He's not a scientist, though. He can't come up with those arguments.
Well, there you go.
He's a writer.
Exactly.
He's an entertainer.
He's an entertainer, right, or politician or whatever. So, but I think that, and that was a little dry for you guys, but it does give you a good base of how this became politicized, and a lot of it kind of comes out of Al Gore, right? Like using a political figure to make this statement, people were then able to kind of use that against him. Okay, so what I'm going to start with now is this Paris Climate Agreement. So, first of all, what do you guys know about this agreement? What's in the agreement? Even if it's just that it's a climate agreement. If that's all you know, it's a climate agreement. Jason, what do you know about it?
It's basically a set of regulations and limits for the amount of carbon emissions I think it is, and a couple other of the greenhouse gases.
Right.
Putting a limit on those based on the amount of infrastructure and cars you have.
So who sets the limit?
Basically, all the countries that came together agreed on it.
Right, but like who sets the limit for each country?
We do.
Each country sets its own limit, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so that's kind of like where there's a lot of wiggle room. Is it's not like one organization saying, okay, each country has to keep it at this. It's each country looks at their infrastructure, they look at their cars, they look at their whatevers, and then they set their own limits.
And that is absolutely ridiculous because at last I looked at a CO2 molecule, it doesn't say made in China, made in
Right.
India.
Okay, and that's a valid criticism for this Paris Agreement. I think though if they I like that model that each country sets their own limits because it takes away that idea of you have this organization telling us what to do, right? Like you as a country set your own. What do you think?
Well, the reason that you can set limits is because you can look at the amount of vehicles, the amount of factories, the amount of just everything that produces these greenhouse gases, and you can look at those, and there is a statistical, or there's an average, like a basic average number of, or amount of CO2 that they emit, or greenhouse gases they emit. And you can look at those and say, okay, well, in order for us to reach the Paris quota, which is the amount of, the amount of degree change in the planet.
2 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, to reach 2 degrees Celsius change, we need to cut back on this amount of greenhouse gas emission. So we need to regulate things and try and cut back on the number of factories, or cut back on the inefficiencies in those factories that are producing all these greenhouse gases.
Okay, now, so this was created in December 2015. So this was under the Obama administration. He signed the U.S. up for this. Again, the vast majority of countries have signed the agreement. As we know from our participation nugget on Monday, the 3 countries that are not part are Nicaragua, Syria, and the United States. Last week on June 1st is when President Trump made his speech from the White House that he's pulling the U.S. out of this agreement. We're going to look at that in just a moment. And I do want to point out that all the polling, and I know polling is kind of a touchy subject in the U.S. after the 2016 election, but all of the pollings are showing that the majority of Americans disagree with that decision. They want the United States to stay a part of the Paris Agreement. And so what we want to look at today are what are the implications of the U.S. pulling out of this agreement, okay? All right, so let's look at, where'd it go? we're going to look at this fact checking of Trump's climate speech. So let's go ahead. This is just like a 3-minute video. They're going to kind of show you some snippets. This matches up with this document that you guys have. Okay, I just printed out the text part of it. Okay, so let's watch this. Let me turn this back on. We're going to watch this, and then we're going to read that summary and see what you guys think.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. The risks grow as historically these agreements only tend to become more and more ambitious over time. In other words, the Paris framework is just a starting point, as bad as it is, not an end point. And exiting the agreement protects the United States from future intrusions on the United States sovereignty and massive future legal liability. Believe me, we have massive legal liability if we stay in. As someone who cares deeply about the environment, which I do, I cannot in good conscience support a deal that punishes the United States, which is what it does. The world's leader in environmental protection, while imposing no meaningful obligations on the world's leading polluters. The cost to the economy at this time would be close to $3 trillion in lost GDP. I'd like to begin with an update on our tremendous, absolutely tremendous economic progress since Election Day on November 8th. The economy is starting to come back, and very, very rapidly. We've added $3.3 trillion in stock market value to our economy and more than 1 million private sector jobs.
Next, so you got some of the key things that the fact checkers are disagreeing with him on. So I want to take the next 10 minutes or so, and I want you guys to... Oh, yes, go ahead.
Can you roll it back to comparing the United States to China and India?
Yes, let's see.
As someone who cares deeply about the environment, which I do, I cannot in good conscience support a deal that punishes the United States, which is what it does. The world's leader in environmental protection, while imposing no meaningful obligations on the world's leading polluters.
It's the one where they're talking about per person, I think. Right. Okay.
So Americans make more than twice as much per capita as the Chinese.
Right.
How many more Chinese are there than Americans?
Right. There's like they're over 1 billion.
Right.
Right.
So they do produce more.
Right.
As a country than we do, but maybe per person.
Right.
Okay. So
They're talking about individual
I love
consumers.
statistics, because you can always make them say
Yeah,
exactly
definitely.
what you want them to say.
All right, so here's the issue with the Paris thing. So as you guys are reading this, take 10 minutes or so to go through this. One of the issues that Trump has a problem with is that part of the Paris Agreement says that industrialized nations need to take the lead on this, right? And so countries like the US, Great Britain, wealthier countries are going to end up paying more than countries like China and India, who are considered developing countries. And so that's his kind of main issue with this. So keep that in mind. I want you guys to read through this. This again is a summary, but it is very in-depth. After I read the climate agreement this week, and then I read through this as well, and I feel like this reflects it pretty well, better than like a New York Times article or something like that. So go ahead and read through this. It is a little long, but it's better than reading the 27-page Paris Agreement. Trust me on that, all right? And then we'll come back to the fact check, and we'll also look through the document, the fact check document I passed out to you. So if you are online and you're watching this as a recording, you're going to want to visit the announcements, and you're going to want to access this file right here, right? Yes, David.
I'm curious, why is China considered a developing country?
They still are. When you look at the UN Millennium Goals from 2000, they set 15-year goals for different regions of the world to meet things like to decrease poverty, to increase education. And so they're behind the rest of the industrialized world when it comes to education, when it comes to poverty and things like that. And I think that's why they fall into that developing nation.
I think they do that on purpose.
Probably. I don't know the mechanisms of how you identify them, but according to world leaders and the way the UN and everything is set up, they are considered a developing nation.
Because it makes sense. They're not held to the same standard as rest of
right. Now, and I mean, obviously they have industrialization, right? They have major cities. I think what they're looking at though is the majority of the country, not just Beijing and the major cities. They're looking at the rest of the country. How are they living? What standard of life do they have? What's their standard income? That type of idea. So, I don't know the mechanisms though behind how you identify those countries.
It just don't make any sense.
So go through this, and then if you, maybe as you're reading it, if there's something that you want to discuss with the class, you want to bring up, we can discuss that afterwards. So we'll give you 10 minutes. It's 11:46. So if you are online, you can skip ahead 10 minutes, and I'm going to mute this while we talk, or while we read.
You are now muted.
Excuse me. Okay, so according to the World Bank Group, David, it says China remains a developing country because its per capita income is still a fraction of that in advanced countries. So that might be one of the things that they use to identify that.
So is China a third world country?
No, they're a developing. Yeah, so second world, that's another way to say it, yeah.
There's a lot of big words in this.
There is. Can you read them? Sound them out? Yeah. I can read them for you if you'd like.
No, I'm okay.
You good? You need my help? Yes. Oh yeah, is it all fuzzy? I hate that. I feel like it's gonna explode one day. Then they'll fix it. guys bored to tears yet? It's pretty boring, huh? That's how I felt earlier this week when I read the whole agreement. I know. I know, it's awful. Do you guys want a couple more minutes, or should we start talking now? Do we need like another minute or two to just kind of scan through? Okay. Give you guys another minute.
It's like a books on tape thing, and just went for your jog.
It was so boring. They do that on purpose so that people, like, I think, don't want to read it, you know? Or like people like you that can't read, you know?
This is in French.
It's not in French.
Oh, this is not French? Drinking,
Red Stripe.
That's exactly what I thought it was for Becky.
It's coffee.
Jamaican beer.
I got it at Costco. The cold brew coffee.
That was like Epic or something.
You guys drive me to drink, especially Ethan.
Whatever.
When I grade your papers, I always drink.
I'll turn half a minute.
I see your name pop up. I'm like, oh. Drinking.
No one Audrey moved to Minnesota.
She did?
They might move to Minnesota.
Did they get a job? One of them?
Find out like Friday.
I know, right? I thought I was doing you guys a favor here by using this instead of the real agreement. So. Reader's Digest? This is the Reader's Digest version.
Can I have the Cliff Notes to the Reader's Digest version?
That's the fact check. So why don't you read that instead? If you want to scan this too as well, we'll go through these kind of point by point. Okay.
Was that in here that he said I have to worry about Pittsburgh and not Paris?
He said I was voted by I was elected by the residents of Pittsburgh, not Paris. But Pittsburgh didn't vote for him. He should have said like Dallas or like.
Well, no, it's P and P.
I know, he was trying to be cute.
He's trying to be cute.
Yeah. Okay, so regardless of where you are in this,
You are
let's
now unmuted.
look at this together. So I'm going to pull up the agreement here. Okay, so again, this is boring. These types of documents are legalese. They're very boring. They're very, very dry, right? And so this summary I thought was a good, kind of replacement for actually reading the agreement, but it does give you some really good information that I wanted to point out. So the introduction gives you the key points, right? That they want to establish the 2 degrees Celsius on pre-industrial averages. Okay. Defines a universal legal framework to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change, puts the emphasis on processes rather than on defined mitigation goals. It recognizes the different starting points and responsibilities of countries. And so this is one of the big areas of contention here. So the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, which applies in the light of different national circumstances. So you might be like, well, what the hell does that mean? And this means that developed countries like the United States, like Western Europe, right, have to continue to take the lead in mitigating climate change and support the actions taken by developing countries. And I think that is kind of the whole source of contention for the Trump administration when it comes to, putting these measures in play, but then also kind of picking up slack for developing countries. I think that's a valid argument and one that we should discuss, regardless of where you fall on the climate change issue, because this will affect economies, and it actually says so in here. Right here it says, where'd it go? To achieve this goal, all parties to the Paris Agreement will need to make profound changes to their economies. And nothing scares the shit out of Americans more than hearing that we're going to have to change your economy, right? Especially after we finally just got over 2008. The last few years, the economy's been getting better and better. And so I think that is a scary concept to a lot of people. Frank, what do you think?
The other thing is, on the second page,
okay.
in that gray box there,
okay.
Third paragraph from the bottom, it says, a commitment to a collective goal of providing $100 billion in 2025.
Okay.
And then the next sentence is, and developing countries are encouraged
to
provide
right.
voluntary support.
Okay, now I do want to.
The United States has to give $100
No, you're misinterpreting that. That means all developing countries together, they're using the US dollar as the umbrella term. So that means the US, Canada, Western countries together.
Developing countries, you can get what you want.
Well, that's the idea, right? But that's actually part of when you look at the UN Millennium Goals too. In 2000, that's something we're going to talk about a little later in the semester. When we look at these goals, that's the price you pay to be the richest nation in the world in a globalized society. That's just a fact. It doesn't matter if you agree or don't agree with it. In a globalized society, the U.S. can't just say, oh, fuck everyone else and we're going to do what we want. We all depend on each other. That's kind of the idea in a globalized society. And so when you look at the UN Millennium Goals, all of the major developed nations said the same thing. We'll pay more because they have the money to pay more. Now, I know China's a big issue here, right? China, and I agree with that. China, they're actually happy the U.S. pulled out because they can take kind of a front seat in developing some of the new technologies where the U.S. is going to be lagging behind under the Trump administration. Like, expect China to really be focusing on new technologies that the U.S. could be focusing on at this point. But I think that is a valid argument. Why should the U.S. pay more? But again, it comes down to globalization. If we want to be a world leader, if we want to be a superpower, if we want to be the leader of the free world, you have to lead, right? And sometimes that costs more money than being a China or an India or another country like that, right? What do you think, Ivan?
Has China and India, have they actually, like, supported, like, have they,
They've signed this.
Yeah, but have they, like, paid, any, like, US dollar, yeah?
I don't know yet. I don't know who's paid what or any of the details behind that. Ethan.
So I just got a question because
Yes.
I don't know. So I know there's only 3 countries that pulled out. It was the United States.
Well, the United States is the only one that pulled out.
Syria.
Nicaragua and Syria just didn't sign it.
Is that in the world or like the UN?
That's in the world.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there was 196 parties that signed this. The U.S. was one that signed it, but then we pulled out. Nicaragua didn't sign it because I believe they cited that it didn't do enough, and that is an argument of this. This does not do enough. And Trump did say that in his thing that this is supposed to get more ambitious as we go on, and that's the point. Right, is you kind of start a little lower, and then as countries start to transform their economies, then you can start adding more and more to it. Syria is in the middle of a devastating civil war, so we'll give them a pass, right? Okay. We'll go you and then Jason.
The start of that speech didn't even make sense because the start was...
Well, just remember that's a clip.
Well, yeah, but okay, but he stated that it's just a starting point. It's not an end point. It's like,
well, I think
it's a starting point. It's
okay, so
start and
right.
move on from
so
it.
based off how I've interpreted this, and this is on me, and you guys might have a different interpretation. I think what Trump was thinking is, I'm going to pull out of this, and by the U.S. pulling out, we'll have leverage to renegotiate, right, and to make it on terms that the U.S. is more happy with. However, the rest of the world, when Trump said he wants to renegotiate, they said, we're not renegotiating this. It's taken us years to get to this, and we're not, just because you pulled out, we're not going to renegotiate. I think he kind of banked on that. That's just my analysis. Other people, of course, have different analyses, and that's fine. But I think he thought, I'm a businessman, I'm going to negotiate. But you can't negotiate in these types of situations. The negotiating is over. It was it's been over for a year and a half. It's done. You can't just say, the U.S. pulled out, so 195 countries are now going to have to get back together and renegotiate because the U.S. doesn't want to do this. How do we make the U.S. happy?
I feel like that was his biggest reason of pulling out, is being a businessman and seeing that since we were a leading economy,
right,
that we would have to pay more than other countries.
Right.
He took that as
and
no.
I do see that. I understand why people are concerned about the money, but I think at some point you have to say morally and ethically, the money isn't the issue anymore. The issue is what type of world are we going to have in 100 years? And while these, the guy from the video who's going to be dead in 5 years who doesn't believe in secondhand smoke, it's not going to affect him. Right, it's going to affect us. It's going to affect our kids and any other kids that we have after that, grandkids, great grandkids. So I think at some point, to me personally, and this is just me, the money thing gets old to me after a while. I get it. I understand it. I get it's a valid argument and something that we should all have a discussion about. But at some point, you have to say what's more important: how much money we're spending and a reorganization of our economy, or the fate of the earth. And that's where I look at that ethically in that perspective. Jason, you had your hand up.
I was just gonna say, the whole thing about the Paris Accord is that it's the starting point, but it hasn't even been implemented yet.
Right.
It's not even enforced yet.
Right.
Everyone is just encouraged to start following it until 2020.
Right, exactly, and that's a good point. Yeah. So, and another point I want to bring out, if you guys flip to the very last page under final provisions. I don't know if you guys got there yet, but a lot of the people that are slamming Trump for this forget this part. It says that, where'd it go? The Paris Agreement does not allow reservations, but allows withdrawal after 3 years. So we already signed this. Trump's pulling us out, but it's going to take 3 years for us to pull out of this. So this goes back to politics again. What if there's in 2020, if Trump doesn't get reelected and there's another president that agrees with this, they could enter us back into this. So I think there's a lot of, I think the concern is valid, but things could change in the next couple of years politically, and it could go back. The pendulum could swing back again. So that's something to consider as well.
Wait, so we're still in the Paris Agreement 3 years from now? We don't leave until 3 years from now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the mechanisms. But that doesn't mean Trump's going to do anything active, because they only have, it's like every 5 years there's a like an assessment. Yep. So I don't think it's as if Trump necessarily has to do anything over the next 3 years, and I'm sure that they're not going to. Jason.
Yeah, because like what it said was, there's an assessment every 5 years, right, and your NDC has to be below what you set before.
Right, exactly.
You always have to set it lower, and your actual emissions have to be lower than, right, you at least have to be within like some kind of range of your NDC, but you always have to be lower.
Right, and the NDC that he's talking about is the nationally determined contribution. So that's what each country says, okay, this is what. And so our NDC was going to look a lot different than, say, Great Britain's, right, because we do emit more, right, so our emissions are probably still going to always be higher. But the idea is that countries start working to lower them. It doesn't mean that you're going to go, and it says so on one of these pages, it says that, okay, so on the bottom of page 2, it says, in accordance with Article 4.1, 2 types of actions are essential to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. First, the world has to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, not to zero, right, but to a point where there's a balance between emissions and sequestration. I don't know if I pronounced that right. And so that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we have to stop using oil, we have to stop using gas. The idea is we're here and we're going upwards. The idea is let's even it out and then start kind of going downwards a little bit. But I think a lot of this is political, right? And it comes to money. And that brings me to our nugget for the day. So, which senator received the most money from the oil and energy lobby in 2016? And it was Ted Cruz.
Zodiac killer.
He is not the Zodiac killer.
You don't know that.
Well, he's not, because he's not old enough to be the Zodiac killer, right? But it is funny. Do you guys want to guess how much money and this is just from 2016, so I don't know what he got so far this year, but do you guys want to guess how much he got in 2016?
1.8 billion.
No, not quite that much. 1.5 million.
That's how many people he killed?
No, he didn't kill 100 million, 1.5 million people. Now, when I looked this up, there's a organization called Open Secrets. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. They track political contributions and things like that. All that stuff is public record. You just have to find it, and they kind of find it for you and put it in one spot. And so I looked at all of the people that received money from the oil and energy lobby. Of the top 20, it was all Republicans. But then, I'm not giving the Democrats a pass here. When you look at who gets money from, say, the pharmaceutical industry, your top ones are Democrats there as well. So the issue I think that we as a country should have a debate about, not necessarily is should the U.S. be in the Paris Agreement or not. I mean, I think we should be. But it should be, why are we allowing people to make legislation when they're taking $1.5 million from the energy and oil lobby? Because he's obviously now biased, right?
Obviously.
Right, and so that's what I mean, is instead of, and I understand what the energy and oil lobby is trying to do, right? They're protecting their interests, but they could also take the forefront of clean energy, right? They have the money to invest, so hey, we're going to abide by the Paris Agreement, and by 2020, we're going to implement solar, or we're going to implement cleaner cars, or whatever it is that they're going to implement. They have the money and the resources to do it, but they're still stuck on this idea of we're just going to do things the way they've always been done.
The only incentive companies like that have is public image.
Right.
And companies that do not have a direct interaction with end customers and citizens have no reason at all. They have no reason at all to follow any sort of guideline unless it's enforced by the federal government at all.
Well, exactly. And so a lot of people say, well, we need politics. What I've seen this. I've been reading a lot of threads online. I like to read comments without commenting. I'm a lurker online. I don't really comment a lot, but I like to lurk, and I just like to see what people are saying online. It usually makes me die on the inside. But a lot of people, so I'll look at both conservative and liberal sources, and I'll read the comments and the articles. And the liberals were, can't believe we pull out of the Paris Agreement. Conservative side says, this is a good deal because it hurts, it hurts America, and why should the government be involved in this? The government has to be involved in this. They have to. They're the ones that have to take the lead. They're the ones that can set regulations and limits, right? If we said the government steps out of it, then it's just going to be business as usual, right? So in that argument, I think is kind of a poor argument to use in 2017 is why is the government involved in this? Well, those conservatives could also ask, why is the government involved in my uterus? Right? Why are they passing legislation about birth control and abortion if we're going to use that argument, right? So it's a moot argument. The government has to be involved. It's just the way the world is right now. And because of that, that's why I think things like this we should not allow this. And as a country, we're allowing it because we're voting for these people, right? And by voting for these people that are taking this money, we're giving them the pass. So I think as a country, as citizens, not as lawmakers, but as citizens, it would be nice if we all collectively put aside our political differences and could say, let's get rid of the lobbying, right? Like the money in lobbying. Now, lobbyists still do really good things, right? Like you still need people to represent your interests, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm going to give you a bunch of money so you represent my interests. It's here's why you should represent this lobby. But no money should be passed back and forth, in my opinion. That also goes into public funding for elections, right? Because that's another issue. These politicians do need money for funding for their elections. But if we did public funding for elections, that would be gone, right? We wouldn't need lobbies anymore. And we could cripple those types of, what's the word I'm looking for, corruptions that come into politics because of the money. But again, no one listens to me, right? Yeah. What do you think, Frank?
These guys are the senators and the representatives, and they make the laws, and they're not going to vote themselves
Exactly.
out of all that money.
Exactly. I totally see your point there. So what I would like is, that's why I really liked a Bernie Sanders type figure in this last election, because while he didn't win, I think he raised really good discussions that the country is now having, right, of public elections and public funding of elections. But again, like if we just stop voting for these guys and we're like, we're not going to vote for you, Ted Cruz, because he took $1.5 million from the energy lobby.
And he killed a lot of people.
He didn't kill anybody.
How do you know?
I don't know, but I don't see the proof of him killing anybody.
Was that Frontline?
It was on Frontline?
What? I want to see that episode.
You want to see the Frontline Ted Cruz Zodiac Killer?
Zodiac Killer.
Why don't you pitch it to Frontline?
Okay,
They're going to laugh at you.
And,
Because they're like serious journalists.
And a flat planet.
Oh, and the flat, yeah. Ethan wants Frontline to do a flat planet society.
I just want them to send B.O.B. to space. And he's like, I still don't see it.
I didn't see it. It still looks flat.
Yes.
All right, so again, it's obviously a national conversation. It's something to keep in mind throughout, the Trump administration and see where this goes forward. But what have you guys noticed that there were, I think it's now 15 states that have come together and said we are going to abide by the Paris Agreement as states. So that actually brings up a really good point, because the state and local level can actually do more than the federal government when it comes to these types of things. So when people get frustrated by the federal government is doing the federal government, all right? But we live in Arizona. What can Arizona do, right? And Phoenix said, that's the mayor of Phoenix, Greg Stanton, said Phoenix will abide by the Paris Agreement. So, that's heartening that the majority of Americans are behind this, and we realize it's a problem, and that even if the federal government's not going to do anything, which we want them to, but if they're not, we can't change that, but we can change on the local and the state level.
Well, the federal government never said they weren't going to do anything about climate change. They just said they're pulling out of
Right,
the
but do you really think Trump's going to do anything?
I don't
know. That's just my opinion based on who he's appointed, because the guy he's appointed as the head of the EPA is actively working against the EPA and their mission.
Didn't they shut down the...
I mean, if Trump does something, I'll give him his credit. I'll give him his due. Absolutely.
I know he's trying to get into the whole infrastructure to upgrade our infrastructure.
Right, but if we're going to upgrade our infrastructure, it makes sense that we would do it with clean energy, right? So we'll see what he does. Well, I'm not saying he won't. I'm just saying based off his track record, he does not care about climate change. He said he cares about the environment. Everything he said before this shows that he does not care about the environment. So I'm looking at his track record.
Right.
I'm all for giving him his credit when credit's due. But as of right now, I have not seen him do one thing that pushes us forward progressively when it comes to the climate change. If you guys see him doing something, please let me know. I'm all for giving him his due. But until then, I'm very, very skeptical about how far he's going to push this.
One of the questions that comes up when you ask the question of, it doesn't mean that he's not going to, is if he's going to, if they plan on following the clean energy path, why pull out?
Right.
What's their reason for pulling out?
Money.
Just saved all that money.
Okay, save the money.
But he's not, oh, where is he going to invest this money?
Exactly.
In the wall.
In the wall. No, Mexico's paying for that.
Yeah, it's like, why pull out when you're going to be spending the money?
Okay, well, he also cited coal, right? Because when you got to give Trump credit here. He is trying to abide by what he campaigned on and the people that voted for him. And coal country really overwhelmingly voted for him, like in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. But the problem with coal is it's coal and it's a dirty energy. And as a world, we need to, I'm not saying we have to stop that right now. But those people are legitimately concerned about losing their livelihood, and they should be. But why can't those people be the first people in the clean energy sector? Like if you're a former coal miner, you get first pass at these new jobs. We'll train you, we'll give you everything that you need to do. And so he's pandering to that group. And I get, like, those people have legitimate concerns, like their livelihood's gonna go out the window. But what about women who were telephone operators in the 30s? Or long distance operators? Like that, all technology makes jobs obsolete, right? And then new jobs open because of that. So instead of clinging to coal, we need to make make opportunities available to the people already in that sector, train them, and then they could be at the forefront of cleaner energy. But he is pandering to them. They voted for him, so you have to give him the credit on that. Like, he campaigned on that, and he's following through on that. But the problem is there's not that many coal jobs left, so you're going to you're going to pull the U.S. out of this agreement just so that, not just so, but because you're pandering to that group. That puts the rest of us at risk, right? So I don't see him making a decision for the country as a whole. I see him making a decision for the minority that voted for him, right? So, Ethan.
So if certain states are abiding by this Paris Agreement, are they still locked in? Or
No,
is it just
so
kinda like,
they're not locked in. So what the states will do on the state level is they'll set their own regulations, right? So, cars that you buy in this state will have to have a certain emission
so
level.
they're just taking the rule book and then
And making it applicable to their states.
Okay.
Yeah, so their state houses and their state senates can pass their own laws. And that's what people forget in election years when it comes to the president. It's actually a lot more important who you vote for on a local level, because that's what's actually impacting you on a daily basis. And so how many of you actually voted for your other than the last presidential election, who voted in the 2014 midterms? And that's the problem. That's the problem right here, is we should all be voting in the midterm elections. They're the ones making the laws. The president's just signing it or not signing it, right? And he obviously is pressuring them to put through a specific agenda, but that's who we should all be voting for. And if the millennial generation and the younger Gen Xers got together and started voting for our interests, this would all flip, but we don't vote. So that's a major problem, because we're letting baby boomers make policy for us, and then we bitch about it. But this last election, the millennials were the largest voting bloc. We had more people in the millennial generation that can vote than baby boomers, and we still didn't go out and vote. So you're letting baby boomers make decisions. So start voting, guys. That's what I'm saying, all right? So I'm out of time. So next week we're going to talk about U.S. global engagement and free speech. It's going to be awesome. I'll see you guys next week. Have a great weekend. Work on quiz 5 over the weekend. Let me know if you have any questions.
You are now muted.
Okay.
Did you take a look at my assignment that I took?
I have not yet.
Okay.
So I will this afternoon. Did you put it in the right Dropbox?
I think I did.
Okay.